Hello, my name is Brant. Today is the fifth day of March 2021. How the year is moving at a rapid pace. I'm going to read some information from Red Hawk on the book called Self Remembering the Path to Non Judgmental Love. I think that's an interesting title, the subtitle part here, The Path to Non Judgmental Love. The problem is simply is that I think we all are judging others who we claim to love. And this is speaking of the completely opposite of that. So here we go. This is from page 38. In fact, this so-called I, which is used constantly, which thinks for me, speaks in my name, acts for me, is a machine, binary computer, programmed from childhood and even before birth. In my case, by fear. It is a liar, unable to be truthful because it is able to see only what it has been programmed to see. It only contends not what is as it is. It's never the same for long, but constantly changes, both agendas and behavior. I am not the same in church as I am in the back room of a tavern, not the same in a bedroom as in the boardroom, nor the same with mother as I am with a woman behind the counter. Therefore, I cannot be trusted. In me, there is a fundamental division. There is the mind and there is the body which houses it, and they operate with different energies, in different modes, and at different speeds. I'm going on here. In order to correct this separation and division, which is from fear, conscious action is required of the being within. That being is presence and attention. The mind can only operate with its thought if it is able to win the interest and support of attention. When attention is not identified with the thought, no thought can long endure. This is a filtering system. The fact is that I cannot observe any thought for very long. The reason is simple. One of two things will occur when I try to observe a thought. I will identify with the thought, at which point all observation ceases and it will capture my attention. And I will become unconscious, at the mercy of that I's agenda, until I once again remember myself, or when the thought arises, I will not engage it, moving neither towards nor away from it, both of which are the actions of identification, and without the agreement, the identification, the fascination of attention, the thought has no power of its own to continue, so it will be subsided. The energy which it represents will be transformed in me into a finer energy. Herein lies the secret to inner freedom from the slavery of identification. The will of attention lies in the ability to consciously hold attention in its center and not move into identification with a thought or emotion. This is what it means when Gertrude spoke about it being the work. Again, placement of attention is destiny. I am present and attention housed momently in a human biological instrument. One becomes what attention rests on. Conscious placement of attention in the body, joining it with bodily sensation, intentionally moving it out of the head, brain, and down into the body where its center of gravity is located, is the key to inner freedom from the law of identification. It is the conscious movement which joins once again the mind with the body via sensation and heals the separation from which all of us suffer. This is the first stage, what we call self-remembering on a fundamental, primary level, this conscious placement of attention in the body. Now, one is present and awake, present in the body and in the moment, that is, I am. One cannot make this move unless one is awake. It is a conscious move. Only then may self-observation take place. Otherwise, it's all in the mind. It's self-divided. It is pathological, illusionary, dreaming. It's a lie. The human species suffers, and it suffers from identification with the lies of the mind and its supporting emotions. Never believe thoughts associated with emotions. This teaching alone can bring about an inner shift in context and change my life, if I understand it from my own experience and observation, if I have verified its truth for myself. We live in an age of terror because the mind is based on terror. The terror of the situation, which is a Goethe term as discussed in chapter 2. Separated from its mother, that is our consciousness, and from its matrix in the body. Therefore, it sees fear everywhere it looks. And when it doesn't, it imagines the terror around the next corner, behind that tree, or in the shadows where it cannot see, because the mind is separated from its matrix, which is the body. The body suffers as well. It suffers from the disease of the fear-based mind and the decisions it makes which harm the body. It suffers even more because when there is no conscious control from an awakening being within, the body is left all alone and therefore must operate unconsciously on automatic pilot from stored habits, mechanically. The result is a great loneliness. The body longs for a relationship with the silent being within. And the being itself, separated from its matrix and out of relationship with it, also suffers from a great loneliness of being. Therefore, I lead a life of suffering, loneliness, and fear. This is the human condition. The result of such circumstances The result of such circumstances is the unconscious wish to die. Thus, the species is on a death trip. When a being is subjected to such constant loneliness of spirit and without the understanding to heal it, of course it wishes to die. Our relationship die, our spirit dies, and our body die. But what is worse, we die before the body dies. We are a race of phantoms, walking dead with a life gone from our eyes, no life in our faces, no love in our hearts. We are a broken-hearted race of lonely beings wasted away on the planet, which is our mother, and wasting away within. I've seen this with people, especially older people, myself, and I see enormous loneliness. It's like their eyes they're hollow. There's no one at home in them. This means to heal ourselves is given to us at birth. We are able to remember ourselves and to observe ourselves. They go together, are one practice. First, I remember myself. I am here now in this body, in this place. This is part of what we call the first stage, self-remembering. I remember who I am. I am attention, and so I can consciously move my center of gravity downward out of the mind and to the relationship with the body, which I occupy. This move creates a space within which attention may occupy. However, I see that I do not respect this space. I do not value it enough. Therefore, I do not struggle often to maintain it or to remain there for long before I succumb to the siren's call of thought. This space, this center of gravity, is empowered by respect, born of suffering and remorse. Yeah, the brain itself, the mind, is actually afraid of it. If it doesn't have complete attention, it's fearful itself. It's longing for attention itself. And so when you occupy another particular area of the body, as it's saying, it suddenly becomes frantic and says, what's going on here? You see? And we learned this as we learned it in our childhood, but we probably learned it in our DNA, I think. And so anyway, so right now, if you wish something for yourself, stop with the book open just here, set it down and bring your attention down into the body. From the top of the head, try to visualize yourself sitting where you are, your posture, your position, your location in the space. Sense your feet on the floor, your body contact with the chair, your breath moving in and out, the sensations of the body both inside and outside, the temperature of the room, the sounds in the street, the smells like this. This kind of inner stop may be done at any time during the day just to reorient yourself, to get out of the dominant mind perspective and establish one relationship with the body with the presence within. Hello, Lisa. Good to see you. Just reading here from a book here I've been looking into called Self Remembering by Red Hawk. I'm just about finished here. This work to remember myself and observe myself is not a military exercise, even if my tone sometimes sounds that way. It's a gentle, kindly, and helpful practice of right relationship, beginning with myself. It is a healing modality which begins to gently work with my brokenheartedness, my own unique wounding. The means to heal myself is given to me at birth. Physicians, heal thyself, Jesus said. It is the first step in non-judgmental love. This kindly returning to my matrix within. The return to the matrix, which is not in the mind, is such a relief in so many ways. If you wish, you may seek this relief over and over. And as soon as you realize your tension, your lack of relationship, and your absence from the present, the now of the body. Self-observation is a self-correcting mechanism. It is the means by which one may heal a broken heart, or it reveals a heart so badly broken that only God may heal it. And slowly it reveals how and where to find God. It is the gift of grace of a merciful Creator. The destination is the present. It must be constantly renewed with every breath, or the connection is lost. Here's a quote from Henry Youngman. A neurotic is a person who worries about things that didn't happen in the past, instead of worrying about things that won't happen in the future, like normal people. Interesting. And so you see so many broken people in the world. And as you age, I'm now 60 years old, I'm looking when I go to bed at night, I can't fall asleep, so I have to take a herb to help me to fall asleep because my mind's just racing along. Well, you got to do this tomorrow. Such I know I got to do that tomorrow. And yet it's still frantically wanting attention all the time because it's afraid of losing control. It's afraid of basically, in some ways, of its own death, so to speak. So this is a book I've been reading. I read probably 3 chapters a day of Self-Remembering, the Path to Non-Judgmental Love. And how and this doesn't seem to happen, if I'm correct here, doesn't seem to happen until you get a little older, and then suddenly we begin to notice our minds or our brain is occupied all the time. And no one knows how to solve this problem, you see. In fact, and it seems to be, it's not a modern phenomenon, you see. When I speak about simply, I remember visiting my dad, and it was at his home. And I could sense, he had some issues with his mind, but he was there in the presence. But I saw someone that was, in a lot of ways, already hollowed out. And it was a very sad thing to see. I recognized it for something, and I knew something was wrong. I don't know if my dad was suffering from past mistakes, I don't know if it simply is that um, he had issues when when I hugged him. There was no feeling there. Um, Almost as though there was a body, but there was no emotion behind it. I chose to try to hug him in some ways to tell him I loved him. Um, and it it was something that it really bothered me because my father, I don't think, knew how to love me or show emotions. Quite the opposite of my mom. And in reality, simply is my dad was not a bad person at all. I don't mean that. Um, as though it's almost as though he just wasn't there anymore. And I don't see it as a physical deal. It seems to be something emotionally happened to him. I know that I don't remember. I guess it was my father lived up in the mountains of North Carolina by himself. My dad's personality was different somewhat than my personality, but my father at one time was going to try to kill himself. He was going to commit suicide, and he actually called, I think, either the sheriff or someone to have someone come out there because he was so lonely. And like I said, my dad wasn't a bad man, and I, eventually he moved from mountains of North Carolina. My father was a very much a outgoing person. My father was a risk taker. He opened up a business and built it. He was an extrovert. He was a salesman. Um, he called on people, built relationships with people. That was what he did. He did that really well. Um, and so when that, he also worked for the Postal Service. He worked for them probably 20 years, if not longer, close to that. And was working up in North Carolina. My parents were separated. Eventually, they divorced. And my father, part of the reason why he enjoyed even the Postal Service was that he got to meet people. That he thrived off of that. That was what he did. He thrived off of that completely. That he enjoyed being with people. But I sense that simply is that um, some of that has to do with what I'm reading about in this book here. That some people, when they get older, they just give up. They quit, they want to get over with it. There's no thrill anymore in life. There's no energy here. And my father passed away. He was 80, I think 85 years old, 84. Um, And so it just brings back some memories here as I'm thinking about this whole subject. And most doctors, all they want to do is, put you in a certain place, such and such, or here's some medicine. He was not. He is in yeah, dementia. Sorry, dementia. My father also was what I would call had many things on his mind, and I recall when I was going to take him to a hospital that I stayed overnight with him, and I never got any sleep that night, hardly. He had to remind me many times, getting me up, or when I was, in another part of the place, the house, and he says, "Don't forget about me." And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, I know that. Let me go to sleep. I gotta get sleep in order for me to drive an hour away from here to the hospital." Finally, he came in there, and it was like, so I know his mind was going all the time. He was afraid that he'd actually missed an appointment before, and so I was going to make sure he didn't miss this one because they frown upon that. Um, and that I think that made him feel guilty. So he was going to make sure I didn't forget. But anyway, I remember the whole episode, and I didn't get but maybe an hour of sleep if I even got that. I slept on a couch, so it wasn't even it wasn't a bed, so it's a lot harder than anything else. And finally, at 5:30 or whatever, I just said, "Look, let's get ready. Let's go. Because this, let's eat breakfast and let's go." In fact, because I couldn't sleep another 30 minutes anyway, because I just needed to go ahead and do what we had to do. So anyway, that's just explaining simply as a self-remembering part. How, as he talks in his book, as how people are. That's why people are in mental institutions, folks. Um, they're lost, but we're all lost. Except we're on the outside here, not in a mental institution. Most of us are lost. Most of us don't want to admit that, but in reality, we are. Something's happened to mankind. There are theories out there. Part of it has to do with and I'm just elaborating with the probably 5 to 6, well, probably more than that, probably 8 to 10,000 years ago, some massive either flood came here and had enormous impact upon everyone. It affected their DNA, their memories, everything of that nature at that time. And this is my guess. It simply is it's messed up the whole human race. It's not based upon your color of skin. Everyone struggles with this whole issue. And Gertrude, the interesting thing about Gertrude is that he obviously, as some would say, he was a magician. That is, he learned some things on a psychic level, and he actually did certain things with that at first. And then something happened to him. He had many scary bouts. He was shot 3 times by accident in dangerous time, and he nearly died 2 out of 3 of those. This took place in early 1900s, late 1890s, when there was war going on. Happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and yet he survived that. He survived a car accident that he was in driving and never really recovered from that. And yet he had the abilities, what I read here by a person, that a man was dealing with what I call post PTSD, I guess it's post traumatic syndrome after World War II, was in enormous depression. And somehow Gertrude was able to heal him. And once he healed him, the energy vaporized out of his body, and he had to go somewhere and it was only a matter of maybe 10 minutes as the witness was talking about it. And he was back to himself. And he had forgotten that he was able to do that. And I believe Gertrude was a extremely different, he was able to do many different things. He did many talks. He visited America, I think 2, if not 3 times. He was in England. Been basically across the whole world. And what he did was he studied what we call the tribes of ancient days that they were still occupied in little communities in Himalayas or in India, that is, and also in the Middle East, in Egypt. He visited those areas and was either taught by either shaman what he knew, and he learned from them by observing what they were doing. And he brought it into his life, and then eventually he used it in his work. Gertrude basically said simply, man is a machine. He used the word computer naturally because computer was not around yet at that point, but he said we were like machines. We're not conscious of what we're doing. That's why that certain things that people react, either emotions at their lower level of their chakras, either for pleasure or a lot of times to do with fear, and they react. Usually to do with the sexual organs or emotions. And so man is at the lower 2 chakras of his system in his body, and he's not making progress. And so that's why sometimes people, men or women, do crazy things. They just simply go bananas. A lot to do with their what's happened in their past, maybe to do with trauma that's happened to them, and that it recurs. But he was saying simply is that you must be silent and observe what is going on. And the only way you can do that was that to work it both ways was he saw was that you must do work, physical work, and to see how far you could do these things. He was on the right track. So was Ouspensky, a Russian-born gentleman who was actually accompanying him for quite a while in his life. And then we have Maurice Nicole, who was an Englishman who was actually a student of Gertrude and also of Ouspensky. And he wrote what we call the psychological commentaries. And so this is the meat. This is not the baby food. This is the meat of actually how to solve your non-relenting mind, always speaking to itself all the time, wanting attention. And Maurice Nicole was not only that, he was also a student of Carl Jung. And he passed away, I think, in the mid-60s or late 60s. And The last person to pass away, as far as I know of, that was really close to Gertrude was Jean Salsman. She wrote a book called The Reality of Being, The Fourth Way of Gertrude, and she was his secretary. So she was around him most of the time, and she lived to be, I think, let's see, if I recall correctly, maybe look it up here. Because Gertrude passed away in 1948. 1 year later, Ouspensky passed away at 40 in the year 1949. And I am trying to find out when she passed away, and I don't see it here. She passed away in 1990. She lived to be over 100 years old. She was born in 1889 and died in 1990. She was born in France and pursued a career in music, dance, and theater. She met Gertrude in 1919 and became his closest pupil for his death in 1949. And actually, Gertrude gave her the direction of not only to help her find centers in the future. She founded a center in New York, Paris, London, and Caracas in Venezuela. Obviously, with her dance movements are incredibly important. There were symbols for Gertrude to figure out certain things. I've yet to get into that. I will later on. Gertrude was not what I call a very innocent man, though. He lived what we would call enjoyed his brandy, and he obviously many women were. I mean, this is what men even said, that his eyes were magical, and so that he didn't have a problem having someone not to sleep with him sometimes. If that's a nice, polite way of saying it, because he fathered. I mean, he did. Yeah, these women got pregnant, and so he was seen almost as though a spiritual leader in some ways. Although I don't know if I would call it all that. I'm not putting Gertrude on a pedestal here. I'm just letting you know the real man, and such and such. The funny thing is that simply Gertrude and Ouspensky met. They were actually Ouspensky actually was doing a somewhat similar thing that Gertrude was doing. He was going to certain areas of the world and trying to pick up, and he was in India, and eventually he got frustrated and he came back to St. Petersburg, Russia, and eventually Gertrude decided he was going to try his base in Moscow, Russia, and they eventually met. Him and Ouspensky met in St. Petersburg, but the timing was wrong. It wasn't the right time, because it was the start of the World War I, and the Bolsheviks were involved also. So it meant that they had to move. They had to do something else, and eventually they had to leave the country. And eventually they broke. Eventually, Ouspensky couldn't get along with Gertrude. I think Ouspensky was far more of a serious person, or anyway, more rigid. I don't know how do you call it, but anyway, the point simply is that they broke their paths, and Ouspensky stayed in England, and Gertrude was actually in France. So I just thought I'd share that with you guys, some history about the past. This is a when I'm dealing with this whole issue, this is a huge deal. I mean, when I say this, let me explain. Gertrude didn't write, but I think 3 books. He's not known as a writer. One of his books is called Life is Real Only Then When I Am. He also does a work, what we call Beelzebub, which was to do with his, I think his son, something to do with that. I have not read that work. And eventually he wrote another particular book, and then he quit. And he was at one point trying to, okay, Lisa, you take care. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate you being here. And so he needed money, and he chose to go back into speaking and lecturing. And he came to America, I think in the probably the early 40s, somewhere in that neighborhood, and eventually had to go back to France. And yeah, you take care, and you have a good evening, and enjoy your evening, Lisa. We'll talk soon, okay? And appreciate you being here. And so he was in a car accident, and that something happened with his second accident that basically he lost his mom to cancer. No, not to cancer. His wife, he lost his wife to cancer. And at almost the same time, he lost his mom. It was something to do with her liver, is what I recall. Which basically, in some ways, broke his spirit, I think. And then him being in an accident later, basically, the life was drained out of him, is what I understood, what I read so far. But anyway, I think this guy's key. I think he's very key. I think that's why there is still interest in the fourth way. I think that there are people are trying to find the problem in their lives and why they're not at peace with themselves. And I'm just speculating simply is that there's still people meeting and having the fourth way here in America and elsewhere. There are different leaders. They mainly are in major cities, New York, San Francisco, that type of thing. But he's had an effect upon other people himself, and there are other books here. They're written by Maurice. Maurice Nicole was basically a student, and apparently he enjoyed writing, and he observed a lot of things what was going on. He wrote not only the psychological commentaries, which are what I call 300 or 400 page books, and them being five volumes. So they're not; these are deeper books. These are not books that you pick up and read 100 pages a day. No way. You may get through maybe 10 or 15 pages. And then he wrote other books. He wrote The New Man, wrote a book called Mark. A lot of his works, Maurice Nicole bases it from Scripture. He sees the Scripture itself as psychological. He wrote a book, simply a short book called simply it's a simple explanation of work ideas, what Gertrude talked about, what he spoke about. And then he wrote the word he talked about witnessing, key word, how Christians have misconstrued this word, thinking they have to witness to others when reality simply was to witness themselves. Interesting perspective. He also wrote a book dealing with what we call the parables in the Bible. which most people, there are two meanings here in these books. That's what people don't understand. With parables, there's not that you have a literal interpretation, and then you have a deeper esoteric meaning with that writing. You follow me? In other words, it's there, but it's only for those who are looking esoteric within. You see. And it was meant to be that way. That's how the language was passed on, or the vital information was passed down, was that way. It was in plain sight, so to speak. So anyway, I've done enough talking. It's 40 minutes here. So, but it's just a really interesting subject, because I believe it's something that man is actually suffering. And if we can get to the bottom of this and practice what I understand, it could definitely change our lives. Red Hawk talks about that. It changed his life. He went through to this person who helped him, who's no longer living, helped him go through this whole deal. He had a good friend who was a deeper person, help him go through what we would call the dark night of the soul. And he made a comment, Red Hawk made a comment, simply was that I'm here, I know what I know, let's get on with it. In other words, he looked at his shadows and dealt with all that and saw what it was about. And he calls it basically, as lack of a better words, just simply the dark night of the soul. Okay. Well, I'll say good night to you guys out there, and hopefully I'd like to have some questions maybe in the future. Maybe we can comment about this. This would be a good, sometime maybe, we'll see what happens, but maybe we can set up a group here where I'm at or something. We can do something on the internet in the future, maybe to deal with this whole subject, that others who have interest in this would be able to read along and go through these books at one time together. Obviously, it can't be a lot of people, but there are not going to be a lot of people interested in this anyway. This is not something that you're going to pick up, have 100 people to come to, for sure. But I do think it's important. This is not the first time I met with Gertrude. About 5 years ago, I got involved in some of this stuff. Not deeply, but beginning to see some things now more differently than I did in the past. Okay. Have a good night. You take care.